There we go. Looks like it's working. Hi, everyone. So I'm the one doing the weekly video this week, and I just thought I would go over last week's games and kind of explain what I thought about them. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm just going to kind of start with the games that kind of had the worst matchups with the worst ranked teams, which means that you'll see my team second. And work my way up from there to games that had either good matchups or has some really, really good teams in them. So the first, the first matchup that I'd like to go with was Dixon versus Terry, and as we all know, Dixon is about to get into total panic mode because he's starting 0-3. He's just going to get really, really brutal to compensate for the brutalizing that his own team is giving him right now. There was a solid thumping, by the way. Dixon lost to Terry by about 20 points. Dixon's bench literally only put up 13 points in total, which, by the way, I believe wasn't the worst bench in the league. I'll get to that later. We can only assume that basically the hissing cockroach that Terry had eaten gave him like some sort of super special powers that allows him to win fantasy games on a regular basis. Because with his current team, he doesn't belong at 3-0. But he is there, so to his credit. I'll start off with on Terry's team. He was running with the Steelers defense, which I think a lot of people thought would be just phenomenal this year. They got him a total of -3 points. So, not that good, not that good of a defense, but, he's winning with Marcus Mariota at quarterback, which is something that I wanted to bring up, by the way. I don't know if any of you have seen Terry's roster. There are 4 quarterbacks on this roster. At first, I thought that Ben had a monopoly on ridiculous decision making whenever it comes to quarterbacks in fantasy football after the draft, but I think that distinction goes to Terry. Nonetheless, 3-0. 3-0, there you go. On the other hand, on Dixon's squad, he started Ryan Fitzpatrick, which I don't know if any of you saw Ryan Fitzpatrick this last week, but it was pretty hilarious. Fitzpatrick threw 6 interceptions. I'm surprised that Fitzpatrick's performance ended up netting -3 points instead of like -20 or something like that. It was the worst performance from an NFL quarterback that I've seen in quite a long time. Dixon does have a few things to look forward to. Le'Veon Bell is coming back. Of course, that means that DeAngelo Williams is no longer going to be a major part of his offense. Doesn't matter. Le'Veon Bell is awesome. I was in Dixon's position last year. I started terrible last year, and Le'Veon Bell came back, and I had a decent run. So he's got that to look forward to. Plus, Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham is back. Jimmy Graham did great last week. I'm very excited for Jimmy. I hope that next year, whenever we're rocking out our amazing money in the New Orleans Saints, because we are going to have, apparently, from what I've been told, we're going to have a lot of free agency money next year. We might be able to pick him back up. That's just a personal dream of mine. Other things to note, Dixon got Asiata last week. Not really a good free agency pickup. I don't have much room to, complain about that because I picked up McKinnon, and also not really a good free agency pickup. Looks like they're both just going to steal the ball from each other and not do anything with it. Dixon also has the distinction of having the lowest points scored in the league at 322 points. But the interesting thing is that Terry is 3-0. He's one of only 2 teams that is 3-0. But his total points scored so far is only 359. So, Terry, you've lucked out. I'll be completely frank with you. I think that you've lucked out. But I'd much rather be lucky than good, especially in fantasy football. So, good job. I'm going to move on to my game. Let's see. The second worst game in the league. And actually, this was probably the worst game in the league because it was a 0-2 team versus an 0-2 team. Myself and Taylor Creekbaum. Taylor Creekbaum and I have a bet, and I just want to open up with this. It's not this week, luckily. It's at the end of the year, where the loser will be writing a song dedicated to the winner and performing it at an open mic night. all of you will be invited. I hope you all come. Although after this game, I may be regretting that decision. I lost by 30 points to Taylor Creekbaum, and Taylor Creekbaum has a shitty team. Um, so anyway, I was really hyped up on my team. I'll start with my team first. I was actually pretty excited about it. I thought that I had a good chance of going, starting the season off okay. I knew Gronkowski was going to come back, and as long as I started even 1-2, I would have been happy. But 0-3, I'm kind of already writing off this season. Gronkowski didn't catch a single catch last week, which really sucked. And then on top of that, I played a bunch of Houston Texans players. Now, my Houston Texans players were the only players that were doing well up until this point on my team. DeAndre Hopkins, Will Fuller, and Nick Novak as the number 2 kicker in the league. Nick Novak didn't kick a single kick, not an extra point, nothing. DeAndre Hopkins got 9 points. Will Fuller got 6. It was a terrible outing, and that's what I get for starting the Texans. Creekbaum also looked kind of terrible because, Crowell and Wilson are a bit banged up, but Marvin Jones went off on me to the tune of 44 points. I don't know if that was the top of the league this week, but that was brutal. And, if Marvin Jones hadn't gone off like that, I may have actually won that game because, to be honest, Taylor Creekbaum has the lowest points scored in the league, even after this game. 285 points total after the first 3 weeks. I'm sitting at 335 points total, which is, barely 8th or 9th place. But I'm also the only player that's had more than 400 points scored against me. Doesn't matter. I'm here this season basically to play spoiler. And everything I do now is going to be to win the bet against Creekbaum towards the end of the year. It may be the worst year for this bet. I'm going to move on to Troy and Alicia's team. Let's see. Troy and Alicia. Both of them had a matchup this week. Troy entered the week 0-2. Alicia entered the week 1-1. Not that great of a game pre-game. We didn't really know if it would be good or if one of these teams is going to be bouncing back. I can completely say that Troy's team will not be bouncing back. Troy did get some things that, look kind of good for his team. He lost only by 10 points. He could have won with some different decision-making processes on who he would start at wide receiver. His wide receivers didn't do all that well this week. Maybe he should watch Nick's Who to Start thing that he does on Facebook. By the way, Nick, it's awesome. I love your podcast or Facebook Live thing. It's really great. Troy pretty famously lost Adrian Peterson last week, and he also lost his bid for McKinnon and Asiata, thinking that Adrian Peterson would be back. Troy, you just need to drop EP. He's gone. He's done. Let him go. I don't know if you already have, but if not, you should. He's going to be useless now. I did not know that Buffalo would thump Arizona, so Troy kind of got that out of, Buffalo's defense, because he did start Buffalo's defense. But overall, Alicia had the better team. It was just a Tevin Coleman kind of day for Atlanta. And I suppose starting anybody that gets points in fantasy against us, the Saints, will lead to good results. With one exception that I will be getting to later. If you're watching this, I'm sure you know exactly what that exception is if you own this player. Don't really have much more to say about these two teams. Both are middling teams. They have 350 points total scored. Troy and Alicia, I think either one of them could actually end up becoming contenders in the league. Troy is an 0-3 team, so there's that, but he's probably the best 0-3 team out there because he does have players capable of putting up 20, 25, 30 points, which is more to say about his team over, Dixon and I's team. I'm going to go to Adam and Zach. That looks like a good one to do next. Adam and Zach. Zach won this game. It was two 1-1 teams against each other again. Zach's team was looking pretty good going into this. I thought that he had a good chance, and turns out he did. But I would also like to say that for Zach, I really like the nickname Poodle. That's hilarious, and I'm sorry that that managed to get to our league, but we're going to run with it for years to come, and you know it. Um, and, like the dog Zach is, he really kind of made Adam his bitch this week. But at what cost? Well, goodbye, Jeremy Langford. Jeremy Langford is no longer a part of Zach's team. Jeremy Langford is gone. He took a pretty brutal injury this week. And, basically, Zach didn't end up getting the replacement. Nick had that distinction, which we'll talk about later. Adam was probably feeling really good about Mike Evans, and David Johnson, too, this week. All three of these players put up insane amount of points, and all he needed was an okay performance from everybody else. He did not get an okay performance from everybody else. Golden Tate did shit. Ryan Matthews started at flex. Ryan Matthews got 0 points and got hurt, which should not surprise anybody. Ryan Matthews seems to get hurt every year around this time. I will say that Adam can look forward to Terrell Pryor now, who I assume he snagged after his flex position got him 0 points. And I will say that I do believe either of these teams can be championship contenders. Zach's bench right now has so much depth, and his wide receiver squad might be the best in the league. I tried to trade for some of Zach's wide receivers because he's just sitting on so many, and he just doesn't know what to do with them. He can't hold them all. And, people like me and others, like Ben, we really need wide receivers, Zach, so you should be open to trade, please. Usually it's my job to brag about wide receivers, as Dixon constantly points out. Well, I'm bragging about yours right now, Zach, so good job. I was really glad to see Colby Fleener actually show up for the Saints. Basically, Zach is holding on to Colby Fleener on his bench, and hey, keep him there. Keep doing what you're doing, Colby Fleener, because I really want Colby Fleener to do well for us. I'd much rather get Jimmy Graham back, to be honest. And whenever Arian Foster comes back, I do think that Adam may be able to bounce back. So don't feel too bad about yourself. I think that you are one of the better 1 and 2 teams in our league. I'm going to move on to a pretty exciting matchup, Amy versus Nick. I didn't know what to make about this game. Nick came in 2-0. Amy came in 1-1. Nick ended up losing this. I thought Nick would win. Nick generally seems to always have good teams. And, this week looked like it was an exciting matchup. Nick was starting to look unbeatable. Amy ended up scoring the highest points total this week in our league. But what's really interesting is that she has the distinction of having the worst bench in our league this week. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players that got her absolutely no points at all. She has a total of 11 points on her bench this week, which was the worst of the week. But it does show that she had good awareness of who to start. So in a way, that's a compliment. A lot of people judge, how good your team is by how much better your team performs over your bench. So it was good decision making. Surprisingly, though, Amy, you are not using your injured reserve slot. And you could really use that because you have a lot of injured players and you can grab an extra just to hold on to. You're also still holding on to McFadden, which surprises me. I would drop him. He doesn't seem very useful for the rest of the year. Nick, hold on. Nick had to say goodbye this week to Shane Vereen, who had a pretty nasty injury, but that doesn't matter. Nick decided to win the Big Spender Award this week by dropping $63 on Jordan Howard of the Bears. Will that be a good decision? I don't know. I dropped a lot of money on McKinnon, and it was shit. Dixon dropped a lot of money on Asiata, and it was shit. Nick seems to believe that Jordan Howard may be startable, or maybe the only person worth money this year, so we'll see. But this week, I just don't think that Nick's team performed the way that it should have. The Seahawks defense fell apart against San Francisco. C.J. Anderson, who Nick has been extremely high on. If you've watched Nick's podcast, and again, Nick, you're podcast, broadcast, Facebook thing. It looks good. I love it. I love it so much. It's helped me out a lot, and it helps me kind of understand the individual matchups that people have each week. Unfortunately, though, he's been really high on C.J. Anderson, and C.J. Anderson only put up 4 points this week. Nick's team would have beaten a number of the rest of us, so I'll give him that. And Nick really couldn't contend with Drew Brees on the other team, who just looks like he may have been quite a bit of a steal with how late that he went. Mark Ingram had a really good game. T.Y. Hilton is incredible. Emmanuel Sanders no longer deserves to be called the second receiver in Denver, and these are all Amy's players. So I'm kind of scared of Amy. I think Amy is going to go far in this league. This is a top team. I think that Amy could win many games in the future. She kind of has a running back issue right now. Hopefully some of her running backs come back and, get healthy again. I would like to say that Amy's team is the top scoring team in the league right now total. 416 points, which is literally 150 points after only 3 games above Taylor Creekbaum's score and 60 points above the league average. Now I'm going to go to the last game, Joseph versus Ben. Let me go look for it. Joseph and Ben. This was one of the more exciting games going into this week. Ben was 2-0. Joseph was 1-1. I don't think anybody expected Ben to be this good this year. Ben ended up winning by about 30 points. I think that after the draft, people saw Ben draft those 2 quarterbacks really early. Ben was drunk, leaving his keys in his car. We all thought that Ben was a shoo-in for the worst in the league. We were wrong. Ben has come to dominate this year. 3-0. Ben hit really hard on the players that he picked. DeMarco Murray was an incredible pick. DeMarco Murray looks really good this year. And Cam hasn't been playing as well this year, but I still think he's worth it. LeGarrette Blount balled out for him this week. Surprisingly, though, with all of this, Ben's wide receivers didn't do very well at all. We know that Ben is looking for wide receivers in trade because he doesn't stop trying to push Aaron Rodgers and Cam Newton every week for a trade. The reason why he's doing that should be clear if you look at the game. His wide receivers all collectively scored a total of 15 points. 4 points, 6 points, and 5 points for his wide receiver 1, 2, and 3. And in fact, not a single bench wide receiver of his team scored any points at all. So all of the wide receivers, bench, starting, they all scored a total of 15 points. However, Justin Tucker had an amazing game for a kicker, and Ben is now at the top of our league record-wise. Joseph, on the other hand, didn't have nearly as good of a game. Julio, this is the player that I was talking about earlier, by the way, so if you've been waiting. The one Falcons player that really did absolutely shit was Julio Jones against the Saints, which makes you wonder, if he's not reliable against the Saints, how reliable is Julio Jones really? Our defense is terrible. Giovanni Bernard is kind of an unknown every week. He had a great week last week, had a pretty terrible week this week. But your bench is good. Your bench is good. I think that looking at your bench, your bench ended up outscoring your team itself, which, probably could have started some different players over the ones that you did start, but overall, you're going to have some hard decisions now because you've got your studs scoring lower amounts of points and some of your bench players scoring higher amounts of points. I do think that Ben may be one of the top teams in the league if he gets his wide receiver situation sorted out. But overall, I think that Amy is probably on target for a championship run, if you need my breakdown. Anyway, that's all the games that happened this last week. I wanted to bring my son and let you see him, but he's at daycare right now, and I was a little bit late in making this video. I'm going to plug Nick again. Everybody should add Nick on Facebook if you're not already friends with him, and watch his weekly broadcast, because you can ask him a lot of really cool questions, and he'll tell you who's covering who and which players are bound to break out this week. Besides that, this has been your weekly update. Have a good day.